Today's story is Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs by Judy Barrett. This is the series that started that movie, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. We were all sitting around the big kitchen table. It was Saturday morning, pancake morning. Mom was squeezing oranges for juice. Henry and I were betting on how many pancakes we could each eat, and Grandpa, he was doing the flipping. Seconds later, something flew through the air, headed towards the kitchen ceiling, and landed right on Henry. After we realized that the flying object was only a pancake, we all laughed, even Grandpa. Breakfast continued quite uneventfully, and all the other pancakes landed in the pan, and all of them were eaten, even the one that landed on Henry. That night, touched off by the pancake incident at breakfast, Grandpa told us the best tall-tale bedtime story of all. Across the ocean, over lots of huge bumpy mountains, across 3 hot deserts, and 1 smaller ocean, there lay the tiny town of Chewandswallow. In most ways, it was very much like any other tiny town. It had a main street lined with stores, houses with trees and gardens around them, a schoolhouse, about 300 people, and some assorted cats and dogs. But there were no food stores in this town. Chewandswallow didn't need any. The sky supplied all the food that they could possibly want. The only thing that was really different about Chewandswallow was the weather. It came 3 times a day, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And everything that everyone ate came from the sky. Whatever the weather served, that's what they ate. It never rained rain, it never snowed snow, and it certainly never blew wind. It rained things like soup and juice, it snowed mashed potatoes and green peas, and sometimes the wind blew in storms of hamburgers. The people could watch the weather report on television in the morning, and they would hear a prediction for the next day's food. When the townspeople were outside, they carried their plates, cups, glasses, forks, spoons, knives, and napkins with them. That way, they would always be prepared for any kind of weather. If there were leftovers, and there usually were, people took them inside and put them in their refrigerators in case they got hungry between meals. The menu varied. By the time they woke up in the morning, breakfast was coming down, and after a brief shower of orange juice, low clouds of sunny-side-up eggs moved in, followed by pieces of toast, butter and jelly sprinkled down from the toast, and most of the time, it rained milk afterwards. For lunch one day, frankfurters, already in their rolls, blew in from the northwest at about 5 miles an hour. There were mustard clouds nearby, and then the wind shifted to the east and brought in baked beans. The drizzle of soda finished off the meal. Dinner one night consisted of lamb chops, becoming heavy at times with occasional ketchup. Periods of peas and baked potatoes were followed by a gradual clearing with a wonderful jello setting in the west. The sanitation department of Chewandswallow had a rather unusual job for sanitation department. Their job was to remove all the food that fell on the houses, the sidewalks, and the lawns. The workers cleaned up things, and after every meal they fed all of the cats and dogs. Then they emptied some of the food into the surrounding oceans for the fish, the turtles, and the whales to eat. The rest of the food was put back into the earth so that the soil would be richer for people's flower gardens. Life for the townspeople was delicious until the weather took a turn for the worse. One day was nothing but gorgonzola cheese all day. The next day there was only broccoli, all overcooked. And the next day there were Brussels sprouts, and peanut butter with mayo. Another day, there was a pea soup fog. No one could see where they were going, and they could barely find the rest of the meal that got stuck in the fog. The food was getting larger and larger, and so were the portions. The people were getting frightened. Violent storms blew up frequently. Awful things were happening. On Tuesday, there was a hurricane of bread and rolls all day long into the night. There were soft rolls and hard rolls, some with seeds and some without. There was white bread and rye bread and whole wheat toast. Most was larger than they'd ever seen bread and rolls before. It was a terrible day. Everyone had to stay indoors. Roofs were damaged. Sanitation department was beside itself. The mess took the workers 4 days to clean up, and the sea was full of floating rolls. To help out, the people piled up as much bread as they could in their backyard. The birds picked at it a bit, but it just stayed there. It got stale and staler and staler. Then there was a storm of pancakes one morning, and a downpour of maple syrup that nearly flooded the town. A huge pancake covered the school. No one could get it off because of its weight. So they had to close the school. Lunch one day brought 15-inch drifts of cream cheese and jelly sandwiches. Everyone ate themselves sick that day, and they ended it with a stomachache. Then there was also the awful salt and pepper wind, accompanied by an even worse tomato tornado. People were sneezing themselves silly and running to avoid the tomatoes. The town was a mess. There were seeds and pulp everywhere. The sanitation department gave up. The job was just too big. They couldn't go outside most of the time, and many of the houses had been badly damaged by giant meatballs. Stores were boarded up, and there was no more school for the children. So a decision was made. They had to abandon the town of Chewandswallow. It was simply a matter of survival. And the people glued together their giant pieces of stale bread sandwiches and wrapped them with peanut butter, took the absolute necessities with them, and set sail on their rafts for a new world. After being afloat for a week, they finally reached a small coastal town which welcomed them. The bread had held up surprisingly well enough for them to build temporary homes out of it. The children began school again, and the adults all tried to find places for themselves in the new land. The biggest change was that they had to get used to buying food at the supermarket. They found it so odd that food was kept on shelves, packaged in boxes, cans, and bottles. Meat had to be cooked and kept in large refrigerators. Nothing came down from the sky. Well, except for rain and snow. The clouds above their heads were not made of fried eggs, and no one ever got hit by a hamburger again. And nobody dared go back to Chewandswallow to find out what happened. They were all too afraid. Henry and I were awake until the very end of Grandpa's story. I even remember his goodnight kiss. The next morning, we woke up to see snow falling outside of our window. We ran downstairs for breakfast and ate a little bit faster than usual so that we could go sledding with Grandpa. It's funny, though. But even as we were sliding down the hill, we thought we saw a giant pat of butter at the top. And we could almost smell mashed potatoes. The